Hello everyone, I am here to read another chapter of the Danish Slaughterhouse. Chapter 16, Chapter 17, Lover's Spat. As you know, I count the chapters differently, so... Yeah, let's just get started. I want to get this shit done and over with. Sunlight streamed into the room through a sheer blue curtain, leaving a soft sky blue glow on the carpet. Lucas was in a spare bedroom of Matthew's mansion, and he sat beside the dresser that blocked him from the view of the door, making himself as small as possible so no part of him was visible. He didn't know how long he had been sitting like that, placidly watching the pale blue sunlight slowly fill the room through the curtain and the little dust specks as they danced in it. But he knew that he had been sitting like that for hours, judging from the numbness of his knees and bottom. Lucas was tired, completely exhausted in every sense of the word. Ever since he rotated rooms the night before, Lucas had stayed up to keep watch of the door, and he busied himself with sorting out his thoughts as well. He worried nonstop about the other victims of the game, especially Emil, and the sounds he heard couldn't be good at all. Although he hoped that no one died, Lucas definitely would have been happy that if Matthias did kill anyone, it wasn't Emil. If Emil survived this long into the game, then Lucas might have another chance to protect him as he should. That is, if he can eat first. Lucas' stomach rumbled and squeezed, and he pressed his hand to it to silence it. It's been 3 days since Matthias started chasing them around, meaning that it's been 3 days since Lucas had anything to eat. Although he is a country and hunger affected nations and mortal humans differently in a way that granted nations the ability to survive months without food as long as their citizens were eating, hunger still had some effects to the nation's physical being. Like humans, going without food made nations dizzy and weak and made focusing and fighting harder, which was what Lucas had to prevent as much as possible. But still. He peeked from behind the dresser to the door, knowing that Matthias was out there somewhere, wandering about freely and being able to cut down any of them like trees if they chose to walk out of their safe spots, and forcing them out of hiding anyway if they chose to stay put. Lucas's jaw and fist both tightened as that observation came, and he took a deep breath to compose himself. It wasn't fair. None of this was. This game Matthias threw upon them was unfair and insane, and the rules and amount of power he had over them was ridiculous. But Lucas knew better than to let his anger get the best of him. The only way to go about this was to be more clever, to find and twist the rules around in his and Emil's favor. But he can't use his wit with a mind only focused on eating. Lucas looked down at his watch and sighed. It was 5 minutes until the next room rotation, so it was pointless to continue to sit around in this one room starving. He started to push himself off the floor, and he moved sluggishly to the door. Breathing deeply with his hand on the doorknob, Lucas tensed himself for whatever may come today, mentally and physically preparing himself for a fight that he'll find himself in, and opened the door. He poked his head out and looked up and down the hallway. Empty and quiet. The quietness should have been relieving. It should have been a sign that Matthias wasn't around and that he must be sleeping, but it wasn't that at all. Lucas had watched Matthias at war, and from what he knew, Matthias was an overeager dolt. When Matthias was in a fight, he continued to fight, staying up at late hours and early mornings, consecutively planning battle strategies and leading an ongoing fight until he'd finally dropped dead from exhaustion, nearly killing himself in the process. But will he drop from exhaustion this time? Lucas wondered, and the thought made him hesitate walking out of the room. How long has Matthias been going without rest, and how much more can he go? Lucas shook his head and stepped out and walked down the hallway. He kept his ears and eyes peeled for any signs of Matthias, but his mind went back to sorting out concerns that wouldn't go away. This time it was his head was killing him. I think that was a grammatical error. Lucas didn't want something like a mere headache to bother him, so when he had bigger issues like the possibility of him and his brother being killed by someone he thought he could trust. But the headache was crippling. The migraine, if such an understatement of a name could fit what he was suffering, was intense. It came and went without warning, interrupting whatever thoughts he was having at the moment, any plans he was forming, with the harsh agony of a white-hot hammer pounding against his skull. Lucas couldn't figure out why such an ailment tortured him, but he could only guess that it was the hunger he had, or maybe it was those damned nanobots Matthias put in their bodies. It had to be those. Maybe the electric shocks fried his brain and now he was feeling the after effects, or maybe the little robots found their way into Lucas's brain and was clogging a vein or two and forming a hemorrhage. Whatever happened, it was getting to Lucas right now at what could have been the worst times. Giving himself a little time to be unaware of his surroundings, Lucas started to come up with a plan that he knew was ingenious and would surely end this miserable chase. He was adding bits and parts of it, making it as foolproof as possible. But just as he was adding the last part of it, his skull went into the agonizing state again. Lucas groaned softly, rubbing the pads of his fingers into his temples. It felt like he had the back of his head repetitively banged into a cement wall. He discontinued formulating a plan before he passed out and grunted in frustration as his plan was forgotten yet again. Lucas sighed and let it go. He couldn't let himself get killed by the migraine anyway, let alone have his planning distract him long enough for Matthews to find him. But he must have been deeper in thought than he knew. Lucas suddenly found himself at the kitchen's entry. Pushing the door open, Lucas stepped inside the kitchen and nearly drooled at the variety of food he knew there were. The aroma of bread and fruit and meat hit his nostrils, causing his stomach to rumble louder inside him. Lucas went towards the kitchen's island, where a bowl of fruit sat in its center, and picked a banana. He peeled it and took large bites out of it, taking other fruits and putting them in his pockets for later. Lucas then went over to the bin filled with bread and pocketed a few rolls before settling down to eat a couple with the banana. He leaned back on the counter and lost himself in the sweetness of the fruit and rolls. He still hasn't forgotten that he needed to stay aware of his surroundings, but he couldn't help but relax slightly and enjoy the food he really needed. And Matthew still wasn't around yet. Lucas stopped chewing and dropped the remainder of his roll. He heard the small noise of footsteps first, soft yet heavy, loud as if the person had no need to keep his presence hidden from the danger that lurked within this house. And then came the voice, laced with a mocking laughter. "Hey, Norge, funny running into you here of all places." "Damn," Lucas hissed under his breath. He turned around, turning to face Matthews. The sight of the other man instantly sickened Lucas, and he could feel his body tense up again, with fury at everything about Matthews. The way he stood taller than Lucas, arms crossed and lips pulled into a tight, closed smile, his entire body screaming how much of the upper hand Matthews had here, and that fighting was useless. Yet the way Matthews looked back at him, it felt like Lucas was being invited to fight, or at least try, and that had to be the worst of it. That Matthews was so sure of killing Lucas and making it into some fun game for himself that he wants to not go through the boredom of slaying without a challenge. But he wasn't going to go down as easily as Matthews believed. At least that's what Lucas hoped. If Matthews wanted to fight, then Lucas would give it to him. Bro, you okay?" Matthews said, prodding himself into Lucas's thoughts. Lucas gasped and jumped back while burning in rage. He didn't realize that Matthews had stepped closer to him, so close that Lucas could feel Matthews' body heat. Matthews poked Lucas' forehead and laughed when Lucas slapped it away as well as slapping Matthews in the face. Rubbing his reddening cheek, Matthews chuckled. "Well, that hurts. But to think I wanted to spare you this one time for some lovemaking. I missed you so much." That's just, that's gross. He then stepped closer and pouted when Lucas stepped back further. "You don't miss me?" Silence. "Oh, I see how it is. Geez, you hold yourself back when you could attack a dude instantly, and this is the thanks he gets. 100-barreled, you were the biggest ingrate of my comrades." Lucas started backing away some more, getting his mind to work on an attack. They were in the kitchen, so there had to be knives around, unless Matthews threw them away to give the others the bigger disadvantage. No, they were there. Lucas's eyes flickered to his side, and on the counter next to the fruit bowl stood the knife holder, with the grips facing his way for easy and quick access. They had to get it without Matthews noticing. Matthews caught Lucas's wandering gaze anyway and snorted. "Go ahead, Norge," he said as he uncrossed his arms. He lifted up his shirt to expose his abdomen and circled some areas. "Now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these are where some of the major organs are in, as you may remember from fighting as many battles as I have." And then he lifted his shirt higher, exposing his chest. "There's the heart and lungs. Any of these you can get to if you grab one of those beauties over there and stab them deep enough. Or you could slice open my neck, which might be difficult for someone as short as you to make a correct hit, so..." He stooped over and craned his head back to expose his neck. "Here, at the jugular. Maybe you can prove to be a better fighter than your little brother is." "Oops. I mean, was." Nose flared and teeth grit. With instinctive anger, Lucas swiftly grabbed a knife out of the holder and swung his arm to stab it into Matthias. Noticing Lucas's movements, Matthias moved his arm up to block the attack and moved his head back. He gripped Lucas's wrist and twisting it, making Lucas drop the knife. Lucas uppercut Matthias' chin and kicked him in the pelvis, which forced Matthias back long enough for Lucas to grab another knife. Lucas ran towards Matthias with it and jabbed it towards him. Matthias moved his body just a bit, only enough to have Lucas miss a vital organ. But it still hurt, and Matthias, allowing a rough, low grunt of pain to escape. Matthias allowed... I keep reading stuff wrong. He grabbed Lucas' wrist again when Lucas tried to pull away and twisted it harder, twisting it until he heard a snap, followed by Lucas' high-pitched cry of anguish. Lucas started to crumble to his knees as fire shot through his body from his cracked wrist. But then he rose back onto his feet and kicked down at Matthias' groin as hard as he could. Matthias loosened his grip on Lucas' wrist and grabbed Lucas' face. He slammed Lucas' head into the counter once, twice, 3 times, and Lucas reached for the nearest dish that he hoped was nearby. And when he felt a plate, he slammed it against Matthias, hoping it had hit him in the face or jaw or anywhere where it hurt him the most. It worked. Matthias reeled back, holding on the side of his head as blood gushed between his fingers. "Fuck, you little shit!" Matthias screamed as he charged to grapple Lucas in a tight bear hug, knife inside him or not. Lucas jumped out of Matthias' way and rolled over the kitchen island, knocking the bowl of fruit out and further injuring his broken wrist. He ran out of the kitchen, holding on to his injured arm and making himself stay conscious as long as possible until he got to safety. Lucas slowly lost awareness and barely got his footing straight and stable enough to carry him up the stairs and throw him into the nearest bedroom. But once Lucas got there, he slammed the door closed and locked it before he leaned against it. Slowly sliding down the door and face down onto the carpet, the pain of his broken arm and smashed skull finally taking him into much-needed unconsciousness. "Oh, I'll fight later. Can't fight with a broken... Ow." In the kitchen, Matthias stood by the island, using it as a support as he ripped off his shirt and slowly pulled the knife out of his side and swearing under his breath in every moment of it. He snatched a towel off its rack and pressed it hard against the stab wound to slow the bleeding, and he hurried into the living room. There he went to the first aid kit that hung on a wall, took out the equipment, and went straight away to fixing himself, cleaning off as much blood as possible and sticking the large curved needle into his skin to stitch up the hole in his abdomen and wrapping up the gash on his head, and cleaning the rest of the blood off and covering it with a gauze and bandage, all the while beating back the temptation to use the little secret advantage he had upstairs in his study, tucked and locked away in his desk so that no one else, especially not his master, could use it for their own survival as well. The temptation was so great, though, especially when Matthias got the hang of the tool and the cool tricks he learned because of it, which could most definitely help him win if it weren't for the fact that it would have been cheating. "Don't use it, man," Matthias told himself as he gulped down a couple of painkillers provided in the kit before packing it up and hanging it. "You've already used it once, and that's all you need." Man, that little shit can fight, though. I wonder if I really do need to use another. Matthias shook his head in self-scolding and slouched down on the couch, sitting and staring off into space as he started to think some more about his plan, something to keep him awake until the buzzing in his head stopped. He needed to come up with the next step, maybe even improvise one to speed up the process, and with his coming close to death just minutes ago and the new stitches on his body, Matthias needed to increase his guard. No sleep for him this time, until he was sure he was going to win the game he started and that no one was going to kill him at his most vulnerable state. "As if I got any sleep before," he thought as he stretched and yawned, watching the afternoon sunlight pour from the front windows and into the living room. And that was everything. And I just glanced over the next chapter, and it is really, really long. So, yeah, but thankfully we're getting close to finally finishing this story off, which I'm grateful for. And, yeah, I'll see you guys next time.